Alright, we're going to look at Richard Berg's Medieval. He has a way of putting his name on games. This is long after, but he was the first person, well, no, the second person. So, Druid, across the front cover it says Richard Berg's Druid. Now, that was the first game I owned with it, but the first one that I can remember, the first game that had somebody's name on it associated with the game was Eric Goldberg's Kursk. I guess maybe he learned it from there. Anyway, most of his games don't have it plastered across the front like that. He's kind of a divisive figure. Anyway, here's a map of Europe. There's chunks missing. Well, those chunks are in this deck here, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But this is something of an experiment for me because I've tried to fight my way through this rule set, and it's not very good. No big surprise there. Weird new game, weird design, one that I haven't really seen anything quite like. So it's a mixture of something, from what I can feel, kind of like Empires of the Middle Ages in terms of genre. And supposedly there's a system it's based off of Enigma. I have no idea about it. Sounds like a World War II type thing, perhaps. But this is set in that medieval Europe ideal, and what is it? This will probably be 13th century, I think, given the way it plays out. And what it's kind of an experiment about is I don't understand it. I've tried reading these rules a couple of times, and I have a vague idea about what's going on, kinda, sort of, but I don't really have a good grasp of the rules. So I'm going to try to kind of muddle through the rules and an idea of what the game's like. If you're really, really interested in it, well, I can't refer you to anybody else's videos on it. But what I can say is as I play it, I'll probably get more certain of how it works. Or maybe as I go through these rules with kind of an explanation. There aren't a whole lot of pages, 16 pages of rules, but a couple pages of them. So let's call it 12 pages of rules at most, maybe 11 if you take the front page off, that'll work. So 11 pages of rules. That's not a huge game, but very, very different feel for it. So, some counters I don't, heresy, okay, that makes sense. The idea here is you're going to be playing multiple powers. It's a little different from Empires. More like, say, Vinci. But not really. You're going to be playing multiple powers, and your goal at the end of the game is to kind of have the most economic power. Okay. The map is not completely built. Some of it's still in there. And one of the options players have on each turn is to draw a map card and add it to the map. Okay. The game is going to end when the Mongols come and when they do a lot of damage. Essentially, as far as I can see, it ends, I think, after... So, there's there's a bunch of Mongol cards in the game. Like 10 or 5. But then you get to reshuffle. The game ends, if I can find the rules, Rule 3.5. After the last Mongol card's been played. Now, there's a rule on the Mongols which indicates how they work. Here it is. I think the first 3 times they come up, they do nothing. But when that third Mongol card comes up, you reshuffle them back into the deck. I don't think you shuffle anything else into the deck. Okay. But it probably wouldn't hurt if you did. And then played Mongol cards are going to make attacks on map space cards. Now, they're restricted, I think, kind of by this barrier. They can't make it into Western Germany, France, and further and eat those cards. And let's see, I think the player who draws it has the right to kind of choose which card they attack, but they have to attack as far east as they can. So at this point, I don't know what that means. I don't know if easternmost is defined by the D letter on the column, which is kind of shifted, or if these guys are further east than that. Easternmost is any in-play map card that makes the eastern edge of the map visible. So it would actually be this entire line if they were to show up right now. Okay. And the game, I think, ends once 3 Mongol cards come out, even if they're not effective. Let's see. Oh no, the last Mongol card. There are 7. Okay, so all 7 Mongol cards have to come out. And it's based kind of on if there's still a deck remaining. If there is, the game enters this sudden death period. Now, there are powers here. There are some in the deck. These, the ones that the players don't select, will go back in the deck. So if all 7 Mongols come out, then the first power that's drawn automatically ends the game. However, if the last Mongol's played and there's no action cards left to draw, the game immediately ends. There's a possibility remaining, and perhaps more likely than drawing the last Mongol when there's no cards left to be drawn, which is if the deck runs out after the last Mongol is drawn, but there weren't any power cards remaining. I assume at that point the game immediately ends as soon as the last draw is made. I'm not positive though. Okay. Because if there are power cards, let's see, if the last, there's no further action. If there are no power cards left, play will continue until the last card. I don't know. And it's all written kind of in this way with these special cases linked into there. And that's why this is kind of troublesome. Maybe if I looked at this thing, I would have a better idea of some of the stuff, like the sequence of play. But I do have to kind of understand how the game ends and how you set up. So setting up, supposedly 27 power cards come out. Well, some of them can't be selected at the beginning of the play. In a 4 or 5 player game, and we're going to play a 5-player game just to get the most people into this as possible, each player is going to get 2 powers. In a 3 or 4 player game, each player gets 3 powers that they get to choose. And these are going to be chosen in a snake type form where, you know, first player chooses 1, goes down to the 5th player who chooses 2 in a row, then goes back up to the first player. Then if there's 3 cards, they would be, if they have 3 powers, if it's a 3 or 4 player. Wait, no, 3-player game. Then the third one is also selected in that same kind of fashion. Your selection is restricted. You must not pick a power that has a mutual border with a power that you've already picked, unless there's no other powers available. So you couldn't take Spain and the Almoravids, who control part of Spain. And this is kind of tricky. Let's find the Almoravids. They should be kind of brown, and here they are. Now they're listed as owning 3A, 3B, which isn't here yet, and 4B. So they're going to be along here. Why are they here? Here's what's tricky to me is I don't... Oh, here, I got you. Controls Spain 3A at start. It's going to explain that they own this. Now, this is part of Spain's home country, but the Almoravids hold the territory at the beginning of the game. Great. These powers cannot be picked. And that's a set of people I've left out of play because their powers, they're not on the board yet. The board hasn't been constructed. And then you put little control markers, these little suckers, to indicate which player owns which provinces. And let's see. The at start situation, there's some special rules there. There might be at start leaders. Let's look at the card here. Army strength is a bonus in battle. Naval strength's a bonus in battle. Is there a leader? Ruler rating will be up here. So it'll say like normal ruler, bad ruler. Those I think are marked with these little symbols. There's kind of a problem here. Each player only has a normal ruler, a bad ruler, and a good ruler. It's possible you could have multiple kingdoms with a good ruler, or multiple kingdoms with a bad ruler, or normal ruler, and there aren't enough counters to handle that. And they're not double printed. You don't have some kind of back printing on them to help extend the counters, which really would help. Such is life. Alright. And let's see. We shuffle the rest of the powers back in the deck. Everybody gets money equal to the start worth of the powers they have, which should be listed somewhere. Starting income is going to be here. So let's take a look at the Almoravids. They have a starting income of 6 florins, which accounts for the territories that they own at the beginning of the game on the map. Okay, and that cash is of course represented with these wonderful coins. We have 10s, 5s, and 1s, and they all have the Roman numeral on them to help distinguish them. Okay. Everybody gets a handful of 4 cards after that's shuffled, and then we randomly determine somebody who will be going first, and then we go clockwise from then on around the table for the rest of the game. Great. What's the sequence of play? Okay, the sequence of play is you can draw action cards. You draw enough so that you have a handful of 4 at the start of your turn. Okay? Then you have the right to pick a map card and put it into play. If you draw a map card, you're going to have certain restrictions as to what you can do when we come down to your action phase. Then, if you have any mandatory cards that you just drew or somehow otherwise have, say, at the beginning of the game, you have to immediately play them and their effects take place. And we're filled with all kind of like random events here and stuff. On a player's turn, they have this action, well, this D section is sort of their action phase and other things. You're allowed to do any of these in any sequence you like, but some of them cost you money, and some of them preclude other ones, and some cards you play can preclude things, and la la la. Alright. One thing you can do is you can collect income from your provinces. You also remove any disaster markers from your provinces. Now, if you do collect income, you may do nothing else. Collecting income is your entire action phase. Okay? So if you have disasters, this is the way to clean them up, and you happen to get your income too. Playing action cards, you can play resolve as many as you wish out of your hand. You may also discard as many as you like, as long as they're not power cards. Power cards are a weird situation because usually you want to play them, at least early on, because, well, they give you a new power. But somebody else might get that power if they already control the territories. And that's kind of, I don't want to go too much detail into there. Now, let's see. If you've undertaken phase B, up here, map card selection, you cannot play a Pope card. And now, somewhere else it specifies you can't play a Pope card if you collect income. Well, you can't do anything else if you collect income. I'm wondering if it says it here. Yeah. So I wrote it in here, but it's really kind of an unnecessary rule. And I get the feeling this thing was kind of play tested up till printing time and hadn't quite made it. And the rules hadn't really been properly hammered out. We'll see how well it plays and whether or not we need, to add some little changes to it, because this is absolutely a first look for me. And then you're allowed to launch attacks. Now, you're allowed to launch 1 or 2 attacks. This is an attempt in general to take another province, but it could also mean to try to quell a heresy or something like that. And it could also mean a Knights of Christ attack, which requires a card. It could be attempting to stop a civil war. A crusade will not count as an attack. Now, after you play your turn, the next player goes. And that continues until the game ends. Okay, well, that sounds kind of simple, but we don't really know how these attacks work, and we don't know things about control. Control is kind of divided between a couple of things. Controlling a power, which you start the game with, but if you lose all the territories of that power, you end up losing the power. And if somebody has all of the territories of that power, they gain the power. And they essentially get a new kingdom out of that by defeating you. So England could, for example, take all of France, and historically they should have both of these, but they only have this. And then they become France as a separate power from England for whatever that matters. So the particular controls of provinces are by player, and they're not really assigned to a power. So for example, if I own France and I take a Holy Roman Empire territory, that's not really part of France. It's not clear what it is. So I would, say own France. Let's say I don't own that space for some reason. And then I conquer this. Oops, wrong piece. They look similar. I conquer this. Well, that's not owned by France. That's owned by me as the player. And I can't attack from it because I don't own the power that's associated with it. But I can collect taxes, and those taxes go to me, whoever I am. And with some things like random revolts and stuff like that, we're going to have to see how that works, because it doesn't target a power necessarily, it targets a province. And we'll just kind of, investigate this game as we go. Now we have this religion key, and do we have any markers that indicate religion? We do on the powers. So there may be, there certainly are things that only a Roman Catholic can do. I don't. The Pope card, for example, only is really usable by them, I think, and we'll see how those kind of play out. What else do we have here? All right, let's keep going. Okay, so you start the game with certain provinces. When you play a new map card, if you hold a power that's owns. If you own a power and you're on that map, you get control of the province on those new map cards. You can attack a province and win a battle. Sardinia and Corsica, if they show up, are a single province, and they are not a power. They have no card. You'd have to attack them, but they have no base army or naval capability, nor do they raise militia. Okay. So controlling a power, how does this work? For one thing, it allows you to use the army and navy of that power to conduct attacks. And it's whoever owns the card for that power. What about rulers? There should be a ruler per power, and there's just not going to be enough cards for that, counters for that, and going to have to use something else to indicate plus minus rulership cards for that, I think. Right? Yeah, powers each have individual rulers, and there just aren't enough cards for it, counters for it. Okay, so if you play a power card, you get to keep that power as long as there's one of that power's uncontrolled provinces in play. And you place it in front of you and place control markers on the power's uncontrolled provinces. If the player controls all that power's provinces that are in play, will get that province. So again, if England invades France and takes all the current French provinces, they become the player who owns England owns France now as well. And you don't worry about the dynasties. Everything's very kind of abstracted in this. If all provinces in play are controlled by different players, the power card is tossed into kind of a limbo state. Nobody owns it anymore at that point. So if Spain is divided as it is initially, where all provinces in play are controlled by different players, the power would go away. Now that's disturbing. That is not, I believe, what is meant in the game, and I'm going to have to look online and see if anybody can make any sense of this, or has already. Because the way that is worded, now maybe what it is if all powers in play, here's how I'm going to word it. If all provinces in play for that power are controlled by players different from the person who owns the power, they lose the power. And it goes into the limbo in that case. It doesn't make sense otherwise, because Spain starts out in limbo then, and you wouldn't pick them. And it doesn't seem like that's meant to be the case. Because in that case, well, Spain owns one of the provinces, and the Almoravids own the other. All provinces in play are held by different players. I think it's if they're all held by different players from the one who should be holding them. So that kind of clarifies that, I guess. Now, if one person holds all of them, they get the card. If it's divided up and the person holding the power owns none of them, that's when it goes in limbo, I guess. Powers have a starting income. We touched that a little bit. Ruler ratings. They have a starting ruler rating, which is listed here. And we'll use the markers to indicate that, the ones that we don't have. Religion. Does that matter? Yeah. Only Catholics can use Knights of Christ. And all kinds of other things. Only Islams can use jihad. Only Catholic and Eastern Orthodox can be targeted by jihad, blah, blah, blah. We've already kind of touched the Mongols. They're going to attack cards when they finally come in. After the first three are played, and then we have to reshuffle the deck and start over again. Pope cards are a very special kind of card that allow you to do a number of different things. You can call a crusade. Now, a crusade, there's a lot of rules for it, and it doesn't feel like like a crusade does. You're not going to conquer territory with it. It may not even be a crusade in the Holy Land. It may be one against some heretics. You can excommunicate any Catholic player. That sounds bad for them. You can remove excommunication, but that's going to cost you 3 florins. You can arrange a marriage, which is what these are for. And I think the way they go is that I think it's that 2 players are married, but it could be powers, I'm not sure. And I think you put these on the power cards or the player cards or something like that to indicate it. We'll see how it works as we go. And you can allow passage through the Papal States. They're here in order to basically get into southern Italy. You're not allowed to walk through there without the Pope's blessing. Okay. I am going to pause here and come back to discuss the crusade and the rest of the game. Alright, let's keep going. So for a crusade, what's going on there? Well, each player can only play one crusade during their turn. And you don't specify what that crusade is up to, but you have to have a Catholic power in order to play for a crusade. And you have to have some cash. In our game, it's going to be 1 florin, 2 in a 3-player game, when you declare it. If you can't pay, you can't play it. Oh, whoa, wait a minute. More than that. No. There's no specific target. When playing it, you may declare a crusade regardless of the number. There's no specific target, regardless of whether or not each player who controls a province of a Catholic power, which could mean the Almoravid player with his Spanish province, because remember, it's not necessarily associated with the Almoravids. We don't keep track of what territories each power owns. So that player would have a province of a Catholic power. He would be required to go on a crusade. In order to go, he'd have to have at least 1 florin. And if he can't pay, he doesn't go. And the player playing the Pope card may excommunicate one of those Catholic powers of that player. But if he doesn't have a Catholic power, if he has the Almoravids in Spain, that's not really a harm for him. Now, must you play? There's no spell regardless. Each player who controls must. Yeah. Well, yeah. So everybody has to join the crusade when it happens. And then you commit one of your Catholic powers to the crusade per player who's involved. You'll be using your ruler capability rating and total your army strength with possible ruler adjustments. The army strength is going to be the left-hand number on the power. You add the ruler adjustment to that, which is plus or minus 1 or 0. And the total sum of that is the attack strength of the crusade. Now, remember those florins you're paying? They go to the player who declared the crusade. He gets that. Now, remember, he could have collected income instead if he wanted cash. So this is a way of getting, if there's 4 Catholic players, $4 from that. I'm not even sure he has to be Catholic. I will check that as it comes up, I guess. I think it's likely that every player will have a Catholic player, but we'll see. The Knights of Christ, which are cards, can be included in one of 2 forms. If they control a province, and that'll be marked with these little things, I believe. They may be treated as the owning player as the Catholic power. And then they'll be using the value of that card, I believe, for their attack. A player can also play a Knights of Christ card to support their committed power, giving them a bonus in that card. If you're an excommunicated power and you commit to the crusade, you lose your excommunication. But if you're in civil war or disaster, you're not allowed to go on a crusade. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean you get excommunicated if your only power is there? Yeah, there are a lot of kind of fuzzy things here that don't appear to be covered well. And there's a reason I get kind of lost when I read this rule book. The defense strength of the abstract infidel or heretic is determined after all the committed powers are there. You're going to add 2 dice. And that'll be its defensive strength in the battle. And then you'll resolve it by comparing the attack strength to the infidel's defense strength. If the Crusader total is higher, which is likely if not a lot of players are in it, each player who committed at least 1 power receives florins equal to the difference. So everybody makes some cash from this, and the person who called it all into play can make quite a bit of cash, I think. If the Crusaders' total is the same or lower, no one gets anything except the player who played the Pope card, who gets a startup fee. And I think there's a restriction. Only a Catholic player can go on a crusade. It doesn't say they are the only ones who can play a crusade. Yeah, I'm not sure there's any restriction. I think you might be able to call a crusade as the Pope, collect money, and not really be a Catholic power, which could be a little weird. Okay. Crusade formation. Right, we resolved it. Okay. You could also excommunicate someone just by using the Pope card if you don't want to call a crusade. In this case, that power cannot trace movement passage through any province of any other Catholic power. You don't excommunicate a player, you excommunicate a power. And that includes territories that he controls. It does not apply to naval actions. And he can trace movement passage into a province, just not through it, so he can attack, for whatever that's worth. There's possibility of a civil war played on him in some other player turn, but the person who excommunicated him can't do that. And it's removed by a crusade, by a Pope card and money, or at the instant that he's excommunicated, he can cut a quick deal to prevent the excommunication. Of course, you can also cut deals at any time, so you could say, I'm going to excommunicate you. Of course, you can't show the Pope card at that point. If you don't do this, give me this, whatever. The Pope card can be used to give marriage. It's any one Catholic power through the province of any other Catholic power. So the little rings are given to the specific powers, and it goes vice versa. This will last until either power has change of rulers, at which point the marriage no longer exists and the passage is removed. And it can allow you free passage through the Papal States without having to do naval movement. The Knights of Christ cards, another special card here. These are going to be the military orders. You can use them as support. You can play it during a crusade to add to the Crusaders' army strength. You can play it if you're attacked by a pagan power, Islamic or Mongols, and that army rating is added to your defensive strength. You could play it as if it's a power, and then you can try to gain control of a pagan province or a province from Kingdom of Jerusalem, Cyprus, Rhodes, or Malta. Well, there's some of them here. There's Rhodes. Malta's going to be out here. And you can play it as a power on Crusade, which I thought we already covered somewhere. Oh no, you can play the card to say, I'm not going to send my power on Crusade, I'm going to send the Knights on Crusade. Probably an iffy choice, but now they control provinces as a separate mini power and are no longer part of the power they originally belonged to. It can only defend it, it can never attack. It can go on crusades as a power, and it uses the army rating of the Knights of Christ card. I don't know if you hold the cards off to say, yeah, I'm this Knights of Christ. If they take a power, if the Knights of Christ controlled province is a power, and that player card appears, the player who jointly controls the Knights of Christ province gets the card. Okay, so if you've conquered Lithuania in this example, and the Lithuania power comes up, you get them as well as being a Knights of Christ territory, I guess. They're useful against the Mongols. You can throw them in against to help defend a Catholic ruler. If there's a Knights of Christ controlled province, it increases the Mongol defense strength by 1, regardless of the number of Knights of Christ provinces on that card. So the owning player also owns the province along with the Knights of Christ and gets taxes from the Knights of Christ only if a Pope card is played. Whenever a Pope card is played, all the Knights of Christ provinces produce income. They do not produce income under a collect income operation, however. Then there's a list of other cards that have special effects. So like the spy card allows you to look at other people's cards or the map cards or a couple of cards off the deck, or before an attack to let you know how much strength effectively the opponent's committing to that attack. There are assassins, which can be played to cancel a spy as it's being played. They can also be played to try to kill a ruler. And you have a little die roll there, or 5 or 6 it happens. Civil War can be played on specific under specific circumstances. If the power started the player turn, excommunicated, or with this disaster on them, and then they get a little Civil War marker, which is it the music stand? That would be weird. Well, I'm going to guess it's the music stand because there's no indication of what that means, and there's no indication of anything that means Civil War. I don't know. All right. But yeah, you do need a marker for Civil War. And the effect of that is you can't attack provinces, you can't collect income from that power, you cannot go on crusades, and you might lose your ruler. I don't know how you lose your ruler from that. It says see below. Okay, you remove the Civil War marker by attacking yourself, and the Civil War has a defense of 0. You use normal combat rolls, which we haven't gotten to. Don't worry about that yet. And if the power wins, it removes the marker. If it loses, the Civil War is in effect, and there's an automatic ruler change. And the power cannot attack again that turn. I don't know if there's a restriction. Well, you couldn't attack another province with your Civil War power anyway. Each power is only allowed to attack once anyhow in a turn, I think. So that really doesn't affect much. A power that has a Civil War retains the status unless it's removed, regardless of who gains control of it. So if France is in Civil War in a province, I guess, somebody else... What? A power? No, the power itself. So if somebody else gets the power, it's still in Civil War, even though presumably something changed. But the ruler doesn't change either, I don't think so. Jihad. This is used if you're attacking with an Islamic power. It reduces the cost of militia, which is the strength in combat, basically, oddly named. No, those are heresies. Well, interestingly enough, I thought these were heresies. Well, these must be the Civil War then. Over here, they're marked as heresy. We'll try to remember which one's the correct one. It will be obvious with the cards, I think. A heresy, if you roll high, so this is targeted against a province based on its income. If you roll higher than the province's income, it goes into heresy. So poor provinces are more likely. It will not provide income. You can remove this by attacking the heretics as one of your allowed attacks. There's no combat, it's an automatic success, but it uses up one of your attacks in your player turn. And I assume for a power. Deus Ex Machina, or Machina. This is used to cancel another card, but it can't work on the Pope, Mongols, or the Knights of Christ. Good thing it can't work on the Mongols, because that would weird things out. A disaster is going to affect a random power. That's powers, not provinces. And it will affect one that's in play controlled by a player. It gets a little chit, and it will make it susceptible for civil wars. The person who controls it loses a die roll of florins. If he runs out, he pays what he has, and the power goes into civil war. Carefully put into italics, which usually means emphasis, but in games it often means a historical note or something. During income collection, that's when the disasters go away, so you often don't want to do them if you've got a problem. Change ruler is an event card, randomly affects a power. And it says there you use it on the powers table, yeah. And then you roll up a new ruler, and basically, there's your table for that. It's split between the three types of rulers. Okay, how do you attack? How do you fight in this thing? So you attack by indicating a power and how you got somewhere. If you're walking through territories you control, it's no problem. If you get somebody's agreement, it's no problem. Otherwise, you can't make it there. And your attack might fail. You might have to come up with some kind of bribe to get yourself there. When the attack's actually done, you combine the base army strength of a power. You will also, the defender also is doing the same, and both players take a handful of these for how much militia they want to buy. And for every 3 florins that you spend, and this is done in a secret bid in your fist, you get 1 additional die roll modifier. Your ruler will also apply his die roll modifier to any battle that power is involved in. Now, rulers in defense only count if your own power's territory is taken. Remember, so if France conquered the Holy Roman Empire, that's not part of France. That's territory you own that's not part of anybody's power, really, because somebody else owns the Holy Roman Empire if you haven't taken the power yet. And that's just the way these things work. If you don't have if you don't have a power associated, if you don't own a power associated with the province that you have an army value of 0. And I don't think any of those army values go negative. So in general, having the power can't hurt you there. If the power is not yet in play, the leader is considered normal. Okay. This is an action that you take by one of your powers, and you must declare it. You have to pay 1 florin in order to attack, unless you use the Knights of Christ to do it. And if you fail to make it there, or whatever, the attack doesn't take place, but you still pay the 1 florin, and it still counts as your attack. So if you declare an attack and then someone denies you passage, you might have a problem. You're allowed to attack twice per turn, but only once per power. Okay, passage. We've already kind of gone through what you can give for passage, permission, resolution. Each person bids for their militia. You determine the total value, you roll a die, you add the army strength, militia, ruler capability, Knights of Christ card for the defender, mercenaries for the attacker, another card. Whoever's high wins. The winner gains or retains the province. If it's tied, the defender wins. And that's about it. You can't combine powers. Naval rules, similarly. Naval rules are a way to get around the transport problem. Some powers, as long as they don't have a no here, like Lithuania up here, have a number. And that number could be 0. And that's a military ability at naval battle. As far as I can see, it doesn't cost you any additional to do a naval action. You can just sail around. Now, what's questionable to me is, can you sail around parts of the map that aren't there? I think the answer is yes, but I'm not positive. If you move by a province that a power with naval combat owns, they can intercept you. And that costs them a florin, in addition to buying die roll modifiers, which are like militia, except they cost 4 florins each. If players have, if multiple players want to intercept at the same time, certain provinces get first shot, and they say Cyprus, Crete, those are owned by different powers. So that's, I'm not sure what controlled province bordering the naval area means. I think if France owns the Holy Roman Empire, they can't use that to intercept, as an example. All right. Mercenaries, 2 powers, the Cumans and Polovtsians, can be used to provide mercenaries as support to a main attacking army. If you're fighting in a province adjacent to a map card, not separated by a naval area, presumably that there's a land route too, i.e. you can't just go to Sweden or England or something, because they don't have to trace movement according to this, then you can use these mercenaries. What do you get? You get a die roll modifier. You get their army modifier as a die roll. So for example, do we have either of these on the board yet? No. But you'd get their bonus from that nation. You have to own the power in order to use it. Now, strangely enough, it doesn't look like you can help someone if you own the power. You can't loan the mercenaries. They can only be used on your own army. We've touched on the victory conditions. Let me specify them here. It's going to be the most income that you have. So everybody counts the income value of all the provinces. They have little control markers on, even if the Knights of Christ control them as well. If you control the entirety of a multi-province power, for example, France, but not Hungary, which only has 1 province, you get an extra victory point for that. And it doesn't matter if there's markers on things like Civil War, heresy, whatever. Those don't affect it. That's all there is. It sounds like we're going to be able to do this. Little questions on the rules, but by patiently working my way through and speaking them, they make more sense to me. There's a little notes on the powers, which kind of gives you an idea of which ones are good and which ones aren't. And to some extent, if you look at the income they're producing, etc. One important thing to keep in mind, though, is that line here. Powers on this side aren't going to get eaten by Mongols. So that's a worry you can take out of your mind. If you keep your powers over to this side of the map, you don't have to draw map cards. If you're over here, you may want to draw map cards for the express purpose of providing padding so you don't lose territory that you need. The eventual map is actually drawn out here, and you can see it's fairly large. There's a decent amount that's not on here. More of England, more down here in the south, and then this eastern kind of region gets filled out as well. All right. Well, I definitely want to see how this system kind of plays out and how it's interesting. Obviously, this isn't some kind of war game. It's nothing particularly, detailed or anything. There's no real simulation value, but it gives you kind of a feel and kind of a neat little card game. The way, well, maybe in a more abstract way, but the way Empires of the Middle Ages kind of does. So I'm kind of interested to see how this was. I ended up buying it used, probably for a nearly new price, but this is something that's never going to get reprinted, and it looked so intriguing that I'm not terribly disturbed by paying over $30 for a card game, even if I'm a little bit disturbed by it. All right, up it goes.